It's time now for the big question, in which we tackle a major news story of the day from multiple points of view. Tonight, should we be feeding our pets a vegan diet? According to the largest study to date, vegan diets are healthier and safer for dogs than conventional meat-based diets, as long as they are complete. The diet and health of more than 2,500 dogs were followed over a year using surveys completed by their owners. These assessed 7 general indicators of health, such as multiple visits to the vet and 22 common illnesses. A separate study in 2021 found that dogs found vegan diets just as tasty as regular dog food. Some of the dogs in the study were fed raw meat diets, and these were marginally more healthy than the vegan dogs overall. However, this may have been because they were on average a year younger. There are about 470 million pet dogs in the world, and an increasing number of pet owners are now considering changing their animals' diet as a result. About £6.9 billion worth of vegan food was sold worldwide in 2020. That's right, 7 billion quid's worth last year, 2 years ago, and the sector is growing fast. So is feeding your animals a vegan diet a great way to preserve their health and save the planet? Or are dogs and cats natural carnivores who need and deserve their pedigree chum and whiskers? To debate this, I'm joined by 2 pedigree chums of my own. Dr. Ian McGill is a top vet and director of the Prion Group, and another leading veterinary surgeon and professor of animal welfare and ethics at the University of Winchester, Andrew Knight. Andrew, if I could start with you, do you think it's time to turn our pets vegan?
I would say that if people are interested in finding the healthiest and least hazardous diet for their dogs, they really need to be looking at nutritionally sound vegan diets, because our studies really clearly showed health benefits in that respect. So I'd recommend it, yes.
I mean, when you were at veterinary college, I assume you were taught that cats and dogs are, at the very least, carnivores, if not omnivores.
Yes, it was quite some time ago now, I have to say, but nevertheless, I do quite clearly recall our professor of nutritional biochemistry reminding us, of course, that actually what animals need is not any particular ingredient, whether it's meat or anything else. What they have needs for is nutrients, and provided that the diets are formulated to supply all the nutrients needed, there's no biological requirement for them to have meat.
However, Andrew, dogs, of course, are descended from wolves, and I haven't seen wolves munching on broccoli recently.
Yes, it's quite remarkable what you do see domesticated dogs and cats munch on, in particular with dogs. We have a term in the veterinary industry called dietary indiscretion, which is used to describe, very politely, dogs that will eat all sorts of things that we never anticipated they would eat, or indeed necessarily should eat. Our very large study that we published last year actually analysed the behaviour of dogs in enormous detail when they were eating conventional meat, raw meat, and also vegan diets. And we looked at the prevalence of signs of enjoyment of their meals and also signs that they were not enjoying their meals. Things like, did they bark, did they salivate, did they jump up, do all the sorts of things that many of your viewers would have seen with their own dogs. And we found that right across the board, there was no statistically significant difference. As far as you could tell from a detailed study of the behaviour of more than 2,300 dogs, which is by far the biggest study in this area, the ones eating vegan foods were enjoying their meals as much as the ones on the meat-based diets overall. Of course, dogs will vary individually, but that's the overall conclusion.
Dr. Ian McGill, many of my viewers who own pets have common sense, and they'll just take the view that dogs and cats need meat and that they want meat. What's your view?
Well, let's look at dogs to start off with. I mean, dogs are omnivores. Even wolves, I mean, the maned wolf, it's 50% of its diet is plant-based. So a lot of, dogs, given their own option, they'll eat fruit, they'll eat leaves, they'll eat stems, they'll eat herbs, they'll eat a lot of different plant material. So it's not unusual that plants make up a contribution to a dog's diet. And as Andrew says, it's about the nutrients rather than the ingredients.
However, I mean, is there any more satisfying sight, Ian McGill, than watching a German Shepherd gnawing on a bone? He wouldn't do the same thing with an avocado, would he?
I think you're absolutely right there. And, bones are also, they're very good for dogs' teeth. I have to say that's very true. Andrew's studies, looks at raw meat diet as well as an industrial meat-based diet and a vegan diet, and did find that there were, perhaps some benefits to the raw meat diet as well.
One of my concerns,
the problem with raw meat, and I think a lot of vets you'll talk to won't be particularly recommending the raw food diet, because although it might look like it's a more natural diet that dogs might have in the wild, the problem is the pathogens that come with it. So I see a lot of dogs that are on raw meat diets when they're puppies, and they come back at 4 months, 6 months, a year, and they've got chronic diarrhea. And when you look at you do some fecal analysis, and they've got Giardia, or they've got Cryptosporidium, they've got Campylobacter from the fact that the meat is raw, because obviously industrially farmed meat has got pathogens in it, and if people eat meat, they don't get it because it's been cooked.
So therefore, Dr. McGill, what would you say is the optimum diet for a dog, let's say? Because my viewers who have pets will want the best for their animal. And where the budget allows, what is the perfect diet for a dog?
Well, I think there's lots of different options. That's a very, very difficult question. I don't think this study
Ian,
doesn't...
Would you make sure there was meat in there?
Well, put it this way: in the practice I work in, I don't have any vegan dog food available. I have never put any dog onto a vegan diet. So most of the diets, that I'm recommending are meat-based diets currently. But this is new research, so it's something that needs to be taken into account. Andrew's study doesn't say that vegan diet is the perfect diet for dogs. It said it's a good diet for dogs that brings health. For me as a vet, what's that saying is it's an option. Vegan diet is actually an option. But I think what's really, really important is that owners feed a varied diet. They don't just rely on one brand of dog food and just feed that. I think it's very, very important to get food from, a different combination of sources. So no matter what the manufacturers claim, there's always going to be some little thing that if you just feed your dog one particular diet, then you might find out there's not enough essential oils in it, or it doesn't suit your dog for any particular reason. So a varied diet, getting your dog's food from a few different sources. But certainly vegan-based foods can be one of those sources. And as Andrew's studies show, it could be the only source if that's what you're interested in doing.
Perhaps a healthy mix is the right way to go. That's been advised in relation to human health as well. Although I've got to say, though, that you rang a couple of bells there, Andrew, when you talked about dietary indiscretions, which are not limited to canines. I mean, just look at me a couple of weeks ago during Easter. But Andrew, you are the Professor of Animal Welfare and Ethics at the University of Winchester. You must agree that eating meat gives dogs unutterable joy that surely no plant-based food can compare to.
Look, I'd love to agree with you. The way you put it there, so well put. However, I'm afraid that's not actually what the evidence showed when we looked at more than 2,300 dogs, by far the largest study ever done. 15 behavioural indicators of how much they liked or disliked their food, including everything that was ever reported before in the scientific literature. Analysed it all statistically. We didn't find it, unfortunately. We found that there was no difference between the enjoyment of consuming the vegan versus the meat-based diets.
Well, no problem, Andrew. If that's what the data says, then let's go for it. I think the data should dictate policy, and certainly I'd like that to have been the flavour of public health policy in the last 2 years. But let's bring my panel in: Benjamin Loughnane, Laura Dodsworth, and Tommy Sandu. And I think we've got at least one or two pet owners in my panel tonight. Laura, what have you got?
I have a mongrel, not my first dog. I like dogs and cats, but I'm more of a dog person.
So it's a mongrel, boy or a girl?
A little girl, Luna. And I can tell you this right now, if you gave her a choice between some meat or some vegan food, there is no question which she'd eat. And having picked up after her many thousands of times, I can tell you that the meat comes through normally, and some of the vegetable or grass options that she might occasionally eat do not come through normally. So I know about Luna's preferences, but I have to say, you know, we've lived with dogs for 12 to 15,000 years. We know from dogs' burials going back 6,000 years in Siberia that we've loved dogs a long time. And I can't think of a worse betrayal of our ancient relationship than foisting utopianist ideological ideas about diet onto dogs. Dogs may be omnivorous, but I think common sense would show us that eating a predominantly meat-based diet is going to be better for dogs than eating vegan food or insect food, which is one of the other latest fads that's coming through, which is really about climate activists and not what's best for dogs.
Benjamin Loughnane, I know you've just polished off a ribeye steak coming on air and a T-bone, but what's your view about this? Because I wonder whether those concerned about the climate impact of meat production will think, well, look, a good place to start in terms of cutting the consumption of meat would be pets.
Yeah, no, I'm not convinced. I think it's a load of nonsense. I think animals eat meat. You know, there's a food chain. It's a perfectly natural part of nature. If you want to be sort of, you know, above that, above nature, and have a plant-based diet, by all means, go ahead. But enforcing it on dogs and cats is just absolutely farcical. My dog, I know, would be absolutely furious if she didn't get a nice, juicy lamb bone every now and then to gnaw on. And not only furious, but she'd probably be haggard and weak and develop all sorts of deficiencies because ultimately it's not a healthy diet. It's not healthy for humans. It's far less healthy, I'd imagine, for animals. But if we're going to get onto the issue of the ethics around consuming meat or animal products, is it not a bit unethical to have pets in the first place? You know, keeping animals and, you know, having them, in some cases, tied up or in cages or
and
whatever.
Stroking them.
And
You've got to get a consent form, surely, from an animal.
You haven't got the consent of the animal. Have you asked that animal if you want it to live in your house?
Can I have a tickle?
It's ridiculous. Look, when you get into this, wade into this ridiculous realm, you descend into madness. I think just leave the animals out of it. If you want to be a vegan, go and eat your celery. Get on with it. Stop forcing the dogs to do it too.
Tommy?
Yeah, well, I'm going to put a little spin on it. I think animals are animals, and if they lived in the wild and they ate meat, raw meat in the wild, then that's what they should carry on doing. That's what's part of their kind of makeup. But if I could just put a little spin on this, when I was in the Punjab, where my family, my roots come from, and it's farmland, and my uncle had a massive mastiff. It was a beautiful dog, big dog, and it was purely vegetarian. It used to eat chapatis and veg, because they all eat veg, and the veg grows all there on the farm. And this dog didn't look hungry at all. I did see it lick his lips when the chicken would go past. I'm not saying, he probably was eyeing it up, but he wouldn't know, he wouldn't go for it, and it looked perfectly healthy. I'm just saying there might be another way, but I don't know for sure. But I think it's only natural to give them the food that they would have if they were in the wild.
Andrew Knight, you were shaking your head when you heard Benjamin Loughnane's comments about the environment and feeding animals a plant-based diet.
Yeah, the idea that dogs will become weak and anemic if they are maintained on vegan diets is unfortunately very, very false. It's something that has been studied in one of the earlier studies. We actually found a range of health benefits for the dogs maintained on nutritionally sound vegan diets. So if you're serious about wanting to provide the diet that's going to provide the best health for your dog, have less veterinary visits, significantly less medication requirements, potentially a better sense of well-being, more mobility, and so on. It has to be a nutritionally sound vegan diet. There was no doubt in the evidence. This is by far the largest scale study that's ever been done, and the findings were very clear. I think it's important we also not kid ourselves that what we feed today on commercial pet food is in any way resembling the natural ancestral diet of a dog that would have subsisted on scraps from hunter-gatherer parties and cooked starchy root vegetables left by our ancestors around campfires. Actually, what we feed them today is assorted body parts that they would never naturally consume from animals such as cattle, chickens, even fish. The idea that cats, for example, would naturally jump into the ocean, swim 50 miles or so out into the deep sea, battle an adult tuna fish, which can be as large as a horse, and underwater battle to the death to fulfil the natural feline diet for fish is quite absurd. So I think it's interesting that we have such a strong reaction against feeding one unnatural diet which is better for the health of these animals in favour of feeding another unnatural diet which also doesn't resemble the ancestral diet of a cat or dog. because one includes meat and one doesn't. I think that speaks a lot to the personal prejudices that some of us may have in favour of feeding meat versus alternatives. It's interesting also to consider we're quite happy to do so many other unnatural things, such as de-sex these animals, de-flea them, deworm them, microchip them, keep them indoors at night, because we correctly understand that all of these things are an important part of responsible pet care. And yet we have such a strong reaction against feeding a diet which has been clearly proven to be healthier and better for these animals. And large-scale studies show that, on average, dogs are just as happy to eat it, so it just doesn't make sense to me.
Ian McGill, final thought on this. My concerns about the vegan diet for humans is that we've got this idea of people eating nuts and seeds and avocados and lettuce and spring onions and peppers. And, of course, that's all fantastic, you know, also pulses, that kind of stuff. But in reality, busy Brits who are vegan wind up buying junk food. I looked at the ingredients of vegan bacon on this programme just a few weeks ago. The first two ingredients were water and sunflower oil. Are you concerned that if animals go plant-based, that the kind of processed products that they'll be buying will be of low quality compared to dog food or cat food, which at least contains meat?
I think you'd be very surprised if you read the ingredients list of commercial dog food. It's got so many ingredients in it, and it's one of the most highly processed foods you could possibly imagine. So if you look at some of the commercial vegan foods, they've got things like beans, they've got lentils, they've got vegetables, they've got herbs in. So they're quite a broad, balanced diet. But what's really important is that people don't try and suddenly change their dog onto a vegan diet without getting advice and do it all in one go. Any of these changes have to be done gradually. If people are concerned about it, they can get their vet to take blood samples at the start, and then they can repeat those blood samples in 6 months' time and get the dog re-examined and find out how it's going. But this is new. This is new information. I think we need to be open-minded about it, but we shouldn't jump on it just immediately do it. We need to look into it. And yeah, it needs to be balanced. Dogs need high protein, between 25 and 30%. They need taurine. They need B12. And we need to make sure that any diets, any changes include these things. But I think this is new information, and I think vets are very busy. It's very hard for them to take on board these things. But I think, I think we need to be open-minded about it and look to the future. And it's obviously better for the planet to feed the dogs plants than to feed the plants to animals and then kill them and feed them to dogs, because that uses a lot more energy.
Yeah, I do need to wrap this up, but you're looking exasperated, Benjamin Loughnane.
It's absolute madness, the idea that
barking mad.
Just is barking mad.
Barking mad.
Exactly.
It's like man's best friend is the planet's worst enemy.
What on earth is going on?
Can we not worry about their carbon paw prints? It's ridiculous. I think this research sounds like it's highly ideologically driven, and it's just not based on common sense, and it sounds like it's cruel to animals.
Well, it's all about opinions, and I'm deeply grateful to both of our veterinary surgeons for contributing to this conversation. Many thanks to Ian McGill, who is a vet and director of the Prion Group. Also thanks to Andrew Knight, who is the Professor of Animal Welfare and Ethics at the University of Winchester. He's a vet as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much, and thanks to my panel as well.